Greetings, my scattered sisters and brothers in the Lord. Thank you for traveling with me through the Gospel of John. Trust you have found it helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. Today we are transitioning from the feeding of the 5,000 to Jesus walking on water. And you'll recall that at the end of the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus withdrew from the crowd and he went up the mountain. And in the Gospel of Mark, we learn that he went up the mountain to pray. You also recall that in the Gospel of John, Jesus withdrew because he knew the people wanted to make him king, that they were going to try to force him to be their king. And Jesus did not come to do the will of the crowd, he came to do the will of the Father. And he knew that that meant going to the cross. And so I'm guessing that as Jesus is up there on the mountain praying, that the very thing he's praying about is being faithful to the will of the Father and not giving in to the pressure of the crowd to be their kind of king, but to be the son that the Father sent him to be. And that meant going to the cross. Well, Jesus is up there praying, and the disciples get into their boat, and they're going to head to the other side of the Sea of Galilee. In the Gospel of Mark, we learn that Jesus sent them across the sea. John doesn't bother to mention that, just that they got into the boat and they're making their way across the sea. It's evening, and so the sun has already set, and they are about 3.5 miles out to sea. And so they're probably barely halfway across the sea. They have quite a journey yet in front of them. I'm not sure how long it takes to row for 3.5 miles, but I'm sure they're getting their cardio in. And what we discover is that what they discover is that all of a sudden the wind begins to work against them and the sea is getting rough. They got waves now to contend with. And so the sea is pretty stormy. These forces that they cannot control are making it pretty difficult for them to reach their destination. And it's the middle of the night. And so all of a sudden, they see Jesus coming to them, and he's walking on the water. Now, this scares them. I don't know that they were that afraid of the wind and the waves. They were fishermen. They were used to that, especially James and John and Andrew and Peter. They were used to the conditions on the lake and realized that sometimes things could get pretty rough. But I don't know that that really scared them as much as it may have just kind of frustrated them that it's going to take longer to reach their destination than they thought. Maybe more work was going to be involved. But here is Jesus walking out to them on the water, and they see him and they're afraid. They have never seen anybody walk on water before. Pretty sure it's safe to say that. And Jesus announces himself to them. He says, "It is I," or literally, "I am. Don't be afraid." And once they recognize that it is Jesus, then they want to take him into the boat with them. And so Jesus gets into the boat, and immediately everything is calm and they reach their destination. They are suddenly on the other side of the lake. Now, there's a couple things I want us to think about with this. First of all, it is a revelatory moment. And they are meeting Jesus kind of like they've never met him before. They're seeing his authority over wind and waves. They had seen him do some pretty amazing signs in terms of healing people, turning the water into wine, even the feeding of the 5,000. But walking on water and having authority over the wind and the waves, that is amazing authority. Kind of ironic here, the people are wanting to make Jesus king on their terms, and yet he already has authority over wind and waves. Jesus says, "I am." That language echoes God's name that he revealed to Moses back at the burning bush. You'll recall Moses wanted to know the name of God and really kind of the God, who are you compared to Pharaoh? And God says, "I am who I am," that he has all authority. And that's what Jesus is revealing here, his authority, even over the wind and the waves. And the disciples take him into the boat. Can you imagine if the disciples would have refused to take Jesus into the boat, that Jesus comes to them in the midst of their kind of storm, and they decide they'd rather live with the storm. They're used to that. They figure they can ride this one out like they've ridden all the other ones out, and they don't take Jesus into the boat because that would be too scary. I wonder how often we make that decision, to where in our stormy situations and Jesus comes to us, we don't take him into our lives. We don't recognize his authority. We would rather just try to manage the storm rather than have to surrender to Jesus. Surrendering to Jesus and his authority, sometimes that just seems too risky. The other thing I've been thinking about with this is the wind and the waves were uncontrollable. The disciples knew the wind and the waves, but they also knew that they could not control the wind and the waves. And so here's a moment where these uncontrollable forces are kind of working against them, preventing them from reaching their destination. And yet Jesus enters into that, and he sees to it that they reach their destination. I wonder how often we find ourselves facing kind of uncontrollable forces. It can happen in terms of work issues or employment. It can happen in terms of health issues. I don't know. You have your own list of things that have happened to you or are even happening to you right now that are beyond your control. And it can be pretty frustrating. It can be scary. It can create a lot of worry. And this sense of I'm going to miss my destination because I can't control everything. And these uncontrollable things are working against me. Well, Jesus comes to you. He comes to me in the midst of the uncontrollable. And he has all authority. And as we invite him in, we begin to discover that he has authority even over the uncontrollable. And Jesus will see to it that we reach his destination for us. I'm not sure we always have the same destination in our minds that Jesus has in mind for us. But as we welcome Jesus into our lives, take him into our boat, so to speak, what we discover is that he has authority even over the uncontrollable. And he sees to it that we reach the destination that he has for us. So, wherever you are scattered today, whatever uncontrollable forces seem to be working against you, recognize that Jesus desires to be with you. He comes to you, and he has authority over all of those uncontrollable forces. And as you invite him in, as I invite him in, he sees to it that we reach his destination for us. God bless. Have a great day. And be sure to take Jesus in, and you will have peace, assurance that you'll reach his destination